Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment. This is episode 116. You might notice that my co-host and good friend Jim Wiegand is not with us today. Jim is on the road, actually, for the next couple of pods that we're going to be recording. And I know you'll miss him, but I'll do my best to fill his shoes. So we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Ralph Neighbour. I met Ralph, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago. And we were talking a little bit before we started this morning and just saying, sometimes you meet people and there's just this sense of clicking together. And I feel like when Ralph and I met about a month ago, that's exactly what happened. So Ralph, welcome to the podcast. We're so glad that you're here with us today.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's an honor to be with you. And I totally agree. There's some good things that are happening out there. And when God brings two people together, you just know there's something getting ready to happen.
Yeah. And so, Ralph, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about today, and it was this whole idea of church revitalization. And I know that is a big part of your current assignment right now.
Correct.
But before we jump into that, I always like to get to know our guests and let our listeners and our watchers get to know you a little bit. So would you take a minute and tell us a little bit about your story, how you came to Christ and things like that?
Well, I'm a seventh generation pastor. And my grandfather founded the Church of the Open Door in Elyria, Ohio. And so my family roots are up in the Northeast. And my father worked for Billy Graham, and then he was very influential in the cell church movement. I came to Christ when I was 5 years old. And I knew that God was calling me into the ministry by the time I was 12. I had a very unique moment when I was 17 in Houston, Texas, during the Jesus movement. And Love Song was playing a concert. And some of you, if your listeners know the name Love Song, that will age them. And it was there God called me, and he said, one day you're going to go where these guys are and you're going to plant a church. So that became my North Star. And after college and seminary, my wife and I came out and we planted a church in 1984. We hit a real rocky spot around 2000. And then for 10 years, we worked with Erwin McManus and came under his leadership in Hollywood, and I worked with him. And then in the last 4 years, I have been the head of a church revitalization initiative team for the California Southern Baptist Convention. We have about 2,300 churches, and as you know, about 80% of all our churches are in decline. And so that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. And I want to spend some time, most of our conversation today, I want to spend around what you're doing with revitalization, because we're very interested, and I know our listeners and watchers are very interested in this.
Sure.
But I wanted to ask you about your pastoral ministry inside the confines of a church.
Yes.
What would you say as you look back on that season of your life, Ralph, were maybe your top one or two challenges as a lead pastor?
Well, you gave me this question, and I've been thinking about it. And I think if I were to be really honest,
please do.
The number one challenge for me was me. It was my own insecurities.
Wow.
It was my own trying to find my way. And I have to say that I was my biggest challenge in those, especially those formative years of ministry. The second thing was staff.
Okay.
Dealing with staff and leading staff would have been my number two.
Can I ask you how did you work your way through both of those? Like, let's take the insecurity piece for just a moment.
Sure.
I can identify with that. I identify as a insecure young lead pastor. I was 29 years old when I became a lead pastor, very insecure, and
Yes.
I had to go through some stuff to work my way through that. How did you figure that
Same
out?
here.
How did you figure that out and get past that?
I think a couple of things were I had some good mentors along the way.
Yeah.
That helped me, and I think having good mentors, especially during your 30s and 40s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, different kinds of mentors in different seasons,
Yeah.
really helped. I would also say some pretty hard stints of counseling that I had to go through with some key people that helped me understand where my significance was really rooted.
Yeah.
And so I think those kinds of experiences really helped me.
Yeah.
I've always been attracted to older pastors and learning from them. And I think that was probably one of my saving graces that helped me through a lot of those difficult times.
Yeah. That's so true. You know, there's I think about the people, and I can remember those people in my life.
Yes, you
early
do.
on. I don't really remember too many sermons I heard early on, but I remember people who were speaking into my life in those ways. You know, and you said something about significance, and I think, I don't know if you agree with this or not, Ralph, but I think one of the biggest challenges for a pastor, for anybody really, but for a pastor especially, is learning to work from our identity, not for our identity.
Absolutely. And it's easy to say, it's hard to learn.
Yes.
That in fact, when I do workshops for church revitalization, I take that verse that Paul says, Christ who is your life. Christ who is your life. Boy, that says it all.
Yes.
If anything else is your life, if the ministry is your life, you're going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And I try to pound that into young pastors. Christ who is your life, period. Right. And I know that's simple, but it's a hard lesson to learn.
It is. I'm still working on that myself,
Same
Ralph.
here.
Like almost every morning after I get done spending time with the Lord, I rehearse several statements like, God, I thank you that my identity is not what I do for you. My identity is that I'm adopted
Amen.
By you into your family. God, I thank you that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that you're pleased with me before I lift a finger today. And I'm trying to train my mind to think like that. So I think that's a big deal. I think that's a big hurdle for a lot of us who lead. Ralph, tell us about what you're up to in California with church revitalization. Give us, what's happening there. What's going good there? What's are some struggles that you're having? If you don't mind sharing both sides of that.
No, we're going to talk about. We may talk about this in another time, but something I've discovered. I'm 68, and that is, and I've heard this from numerous sources, that the 60s can be your most productive years. And I believe that God prepared me all my life for this. When 4 years ago, Dr. Bill Agee, who is our executive director, wrote a book called The Predictability Factor and created an evaluation tool to help churches see where they are and to chart a course to where they want to go. And we get 8 pieces of data from churches, and then we process them through this process, which is built on metrics, and it helps to give a pastor a 5-year plan of how to get out of where he's at to where he needs to go.
Okay.
And then what we do is we add what I call the secret sauce, and that is a monthly phone call with a mentor to find out where they're at, what's going on, and where they need to shift course. And so we started that. We've got about 100 churches that are involved with us.
Wow.
We have 2,300. We have many more that need it, but I'm finding that it's the rare pastor that really wants the help and is ready to do the hard work.
Yeah. Ralph, why do you think that is? That's fascinating to me that there are so many more pastors who could benefit from what you're trying to accomplish there. And yet there doesn't seem to be a wholesale like buy-in. What do you think is at the root of that? And you can be direct. You don't have to.
Yeah. There's an old evangelist that had great influence in my life. His name was Manly Beasley, and he was from Louisiana. And he said something once to me that I'll never forget. He said, "Ralph, people don't change until they are desperate." And I have seen this over and over again in revitalization. It is the rare pastor that that sees the problem, is willing to accept it, and then either has the capacity or the willingness, both of which are needed, to redirect the ship. And when I find a pastor like that, then I latch on to them because they're learners, and they're willing to say, I have a problem. Many pastors I find, not all, but many pastors I find don't want to admit that they have a problem, and they don't want to admit that they need help.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's one thing. I just be quite honest with you. The pastoral ministry can become one of the easiest places to get lazy and just coast.
Yeah.
And just kind of, I preach every Sunday. That's what I do. And that's all I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I think laziness can also be a problem that I find. So those are a couple of things that I've observed.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. We spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about the other side of that spectrum of work, workaholism.
Yes.
And, we see that as a major issue with a lot of leaders. But the truth is that there are some that we have bumped into along the way who have that other issue of they're on the laziness spectrum. And what we try to tell pastors is workaholism and laziness will send you into the ditch at the same rate of speed. They will put you, health is in the middle. Yes. And helping pastors to find that. So that's fascinating. What do you think, other than overcoming that reluctance to ask for help, what would you say, Ralph, are maybe a couple of main contributors to successfully revitalizing a church? Now, I think you mentioned that you give churches a plan, right? You do some assessing and you give them a plan. Are there other pieces to a successful endeavor with a church that wants to revitalize that you think would be important to talk about?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, revitalization is a calling. And if the first thing we talk to a pastor about is, number one, confirm the calling of your ministry. Yeah. Your personal calling. Are you called to be a pastor? Number one. And I think that's a very important question. But the second thing is, are both you and your wife committed to the place where you're serving now to turn that around, because it's not going to be easy.
Right.
It's going to probably be an 8-year process. You're going to have a lot of ups and downs. It's not going to be easy. So are both you and your wife committed to this? And listen, I tell you what, if the wife is not in it with it, then I tell them, back away. Don't lose your family over this.
Right.
Because it's a calling. It really is. And it is not easy. Dr. Agee says in his book, The Predictability Factor, that the most dangerous journey on the planet is the journey of the pastor. And it has never been more dangerous than this past 18, 20 months.
And I agree with that. 100%. It's interesting. You said 8 years, an 8-year process. I can almost hear our listeners and watchers get a knot in their gut when they hear that it takes that long, because we want the quick fix, right? We want this thing to be fixed in a year or 2 years, and what I hear you saying is it's a much longer journey than that.
Yes, and there are times when it'll be shorter. There are times that it's longer, but you have this goes back to your identity. If your identity is in the success of the numbers every Sunday, then you're gonna drown very quickly in this sea. Yeah.
So Ralph, if you could give a couple of next steps to our listeners and watchers who are pastors who are in that mode of revitalization, what would you say? Hey, here's a couple of next steps that would be just very practical and steps in the right direction to start your journey.
If it were me, I would say have a very hard and frank conversation with your wife.
Okay.
And say, honey, we need to decide whether God has called us and whether God has called us here to this church. Are we called to this? And I would begin. One of the things I started, and I'm not saying every pastor should do this, but we just did this when we got married. My wife and I have prayer and conversation every morning. That is the first thing we do. And sometimes those prayer and conversations turned into long conversations. And but I think there needs to be some real soul searching, and especially right now in post-COVID, to confirming your call to the ministry and your call to this church.
Yeah.
And get it settled. Don't go back and forth.
Yes.
Right now, I am watching pastors that are going back and forth. That's very dangerous. If God's called you there, confirm it and stick with it. And if he's not, then find someplace else.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. The second thing is that you have to find a strategic plan. I don't care how you do it. And let me tell you something. Just preaching is not going to revitalize your church.
Yep.
Preaching is an important part, but preaching alone is not going to revitalize your church. I wish I could tell you prayer revitalizes your church. Prayer will revitalize your heart, but it may not help grow your church.
Right.
I'm not saying prayer isn't important and preaching isn't important. They're both very important.
Right.
But you have to find a strategic plan that will help you move forward, and the people that can help you do it with you. And then along with the strategic plan comes the disciplined execution.
Yeah.
The disciplined execution is critical, so that when you wake up on Monday morning, you know exactly what has to happen that week in order to move the ship forward.
Yeah, I love it.
And that disciplined execution, and it's got to be rigorous. And that's why we have a consultant with every church because it's just easy to get off course.
That's right. That's right. And there's so much going on in my brain right now that you can't see as you're talking, Ralph. We use the mantra, you need both spirit and system.
Yes.
To thrive.
Yes.
If you have only one or the other, if you all have all spirit and no system, you'll have chaos. If you have no spirit and all system, you'll be dry as a bone.
Yep.
They're not against each other. They don't fight against each other. They can be a beautiful hybrid.
Come on.
And so we say that so much. I think sometimes the leaders that we work with get tired of it, but we really truly believe that is true. And then this whole idea of being disciplined in your execution is just, it's music to my ears, because another thing that we work very, very hard with in our network, Ralph, is helping pastors have a disciplined approach to work.
Yes.
So that when they come to the office on Monday morning, they hit the ground running. So yes. One of the things we ask them to do or encourage them to do is to plan their week out. Like take Saturday morning, take a half hour and just plan your week.
Absolutely.
So that when you get to the office, you're not wondering about what should I be working on? What should I be doing?
Yep.
And when you said that, I just was amening you on the inside, because I've observed this, and I know this was true of me as a young guy. I didn't really have a good approach to work.
Yes.
And I didn't learn that. I wasn't taught that in college. I didn't, and I'm not disparaging college. I learned a lot of great things in college, but that was one thing I didn't learn was, how do I actually think down the road, have a game plan, but then bring it back to weekly execution? And I've had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah. I think one of the books, and I'm sure you recommended too, is The Four Disciplines of Execution. That book has helped me so much in leading my staff where we're headed. And so I totally agree. And I totally agree with the thing of the spirit and systems. You can't, both are needed.
Yep.
And I find that pastors fall on one side or the other.
Yes.
If they're not growing, they lean back on the spirit side so that they don't feel like they're bad. And then if they're so metric oriented, then you're right. There are two ditches, and if you fall into either one, you won't be successful.
Yeah. So Ralph, we could talk about so much more in this area of revitalization. I know that we're just scratching the surface, but we're kind of butting up against our time. If somebody who's listening or watching today wanted to reach out to you and pick your brain a little bit, would that be okay for us to offer that to those that are listening and watching?
We do. It's the process is called Count the Cost. And it's an assessment, and we are doing assessments not only for pastors in our own convention, but for people all over the United States. This has been done all over the world. So if they wanted to reach me at our Neighbour at csbc.com, Neighbour is spelled B-O-U-R, the English spelling, they can do it, and we would be more than glad to send them the 8 key metrics that we need to help them move forward.
And Ralph, we'll put your email in the show notes for this episode, so folks can find you if they would so like to do that. Well, Ralph, I know that there's another thing on my mind. I wondered if you would stay with me for another episode. I really want to talk to you about this whole idea of getting ready for retirement. Pastors, what am
Sure.
I going to do? How am
Sure.
I going to manage that next season of my life? I think it's something that we haven't talked about at all, really.
Yes.
A church big C. We've really just dropped the ball there, and I think it's such an important subject. So would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely. Would love to, John.
All right, awesome. Well, listen, those of you who are watching and listening today, you know how much we love you. We care about what's going on in your personal life. We care about what's going on in the church that you serve. If you need somebody to listen to, somebody that will talk to you, encourage you, we're here for you. You can reach out to us at convergecoach.com and select the contact us link. We have contact us links all over our website, and that will give you an opportunity to spend 30 minutes with us, no charge, no obligation to us at all. And if we can't help you, we can put you in touch with somebody you can. So we hope that you're encouraged today by our guest, Ralph Neighbour. And we just want to encourage you to hang in there, stay at it as you continue to lead from alignment.